Want to get your live stream to stop looking like this and more like this? Stick around. What's up everyone, Seth Miranda here, and if you don't know who I am a pro photographer right here in New York City. You may have seen me on some other platforms like Adorama TV or come to some workshops or demos at a trade show. Whatever the case, I'm out there, but this is my own channel and I usually do live demos of shoots and lighting and all sorts of things like that. But I've been getting a lot of questions on my Twitch channel, which is full of photo nerds. It's basically a community of photo people helping each other out if they have any questions or want to share some work or want to talk about gear. It's all right there on my Twitch channel. You can join me right here, twitch.tv/lastxwitness. And the question we get asked a lot is, how does your stream look like this? Because there's a lot of the channels that look a lot like this and they're wondering how I got mine so clean. You can see all this noise here. It's very washed out. This is just a webcam on a laptop, and any other webcam, even if you bought one separately, might have issues as well. So let's talk about a few things you can do to up your game to the next level. So the first thing I want to talk about is exposure control. And what do I mean by that? Well, you should have a camera that has the ability to control its exposure, shutter speed, aperture, ISO. If you have a webcam, it looks like this because your webcam is trying to automatically adjust the exposure for like a black area, a darkness, a highlight, a white area, stupid things like that where it can't make a decision between should it go brighter or darker. You can actually see my skin is blowing out. I'm wearing a black shirt, so it's probably trying to up its ISO or gain, and that's why you're seeing all this noise here as well. All this noise is that sensor starving for light. Also remember, the sensor is about this big. Here, the Nikon Z6 is filming me, and that's a full frame sensor, which is about the size of a 35mm piece of film. Now, you don't have to go all out with full frame. You can get yourself APS-C or crop sensor, or you can get micro four thirds, which is even smaller than that. What you have to remember is, as you go smaller in sensor, the less it works in low light situations like the webcam does, because that sensor is like that big. Now, when it comes to the exposure control in the camera itself, you have to remember what you're trying to do. I use a 24-70 f4 lens. The aperture is the thing that lets the amount of light in. So if it's at f4, that means that's the most amount of light I can let in at one time. If the number goes up, it actually closes the aperture and lets less light in. I wanted it all the way open, mainly for two reasons. One, I wanted my ISO as far down as I could put it, and keep in mind the ISO is the last thing you change. So if you needed a lot of light, open your lens up all the way, and f-stop, lower numbers, wider aperture, letting more light in. If you're at the lowest possible aperture and you're still not seeing the picture you want, that's when you start raising the ISO till you start seeing the exposure you want to see, which right now it's at 250 ISO. So that's relatively low. Some video starts at 800 ISO. If you're getting up to 6400 ISO and things are starting to look noisy, that's the reason. If you're seeing a bunch of noise around you or in the picture at all, your camera's pretty much starving for light. So you're gonna have to figure out a way to either get more light, like higher output lights, or a lens with a lower aperture that lets more light in. The lighting is probably a less expensive option. The other reason I'm using the aperture all the way wide open is because I wanted my background as out of focus as I can get it, because I wanted to create a separation on myself. You want people to tune into your live stream to focus on you, not have their eye bounce around so much. Your background should just be there as an atmosphere, give them an idea of who you are, your personality, things like that. But you don't want to have to worry about like a messy room or them totally losing focus on what you're saying or the stream itself. You want to create yourself as the center point. So that's why I chose that aperture, and that's how I got to that ISO. But what about the shutter speed? Well, we're doing video here, and that kind of puts shutter speed out of the equation for the most part. Once you set it, it stays there. It's based on your frame rate. Like right now I'm shooting at 1080p, 30 frames per second. 24 frames per second is kind of how the natural eye sees things, but 30 frames per second keeps things in a safe area. 60 frames per second is a little fast, it's a little unnatural looking, but it gives you the ability to do slow-mo later if you had a recording and you wanted to slow it down in post or something like that. But for the most part, 30 frames per second is pretty good. Now, the rule of thumb is your shutter speed is always twice your frame rate. So if I'm shooting at 30 frames per second, my shutter speed is at a 60th of a second. And that's where I leave it. It stays right there. The rest of my exposure is all controlled by my aperture, my ISO, and the output of the lighting around me. I'm going to break down my lighting setup in a little bit so you guys can see how I built it up. But for the most part, you want to have lights that are able to adjust in brightness, because that's another level of control for you. And that brings me to the lighting itself. And the way I did this setup was in zones. What do I mean by that? Well, this may apply to you, this may not apply to you based on your situation. I have about 6 feet to that wall. So I know I had the ability to light myself separately than my background. So this is zone 1, this is zone 2. What that allows me to do is completely separate the look. That way I myself can be separated from the background even more if I want it to be, which I totally do. I mean, I have a very busy background back there, but it gives people a sense of my work, and that way I don't have a dead atmosphere. There's like something there. You feel like you're hanging out with me, and you kind of are when you join my Twitch channel. So how did I do this? Well, the theory is if I have no lights on, my camera should go completely black. And that means that the only light that's being captured is the light I'm creating. If you have a picture coming into your camera while you're setting up your lights, it's already including the light that's coming in from your window. So try to black yourself out and only capture the light that you're creating. And just keep in mind when you're lighting to create zones, that the closer the light is to you that's lighting you, the darker your background will be, because your camera is making exposure for the light that's falling on me. This light is about 2 feet from me. That is 6 feet from me. That means that's 8 feet away from there. It's 2 feet from me. Do you think it's the same brightness? No, it's exposing for the brightness at 2 feet as opposed to brightness from 8 feet. And therefore that goes dark, I stay proper exposure. And that's how inverse square really works, is the closer the light is to a subject, the faster it falls off based on your exposure. And now we know how to get a proper exposure. Now, if I shut off this backlight, I should be blacked out. Let's take a look. As you can see, totally blacked out. None of the light that I have here is affecting my wall. And the reason that's happening is when the light is closer to your subject, it falls off faster. That's what we say in photo terms. I'm not going to go into the inverse square law. You can watch the rest of my channel, all the other videos I have on YouTube about actual lighting techniques and light theory and all sorts of stuff like that. But right now I have a 3-foot octa with a grid half on it so it doesn't spill to the background, and the other half is open because I want that to light my face, and I have a second light that is lighting me underneath to fill in the shadows. Watch what I mean by that. So if I shut off the fill light, you can see that I turn into a way shadowy character, but I have this light set up so that there's never ever reflection in my glasses because of the angle of it. You can see it a little bit there, but it's never really showing up too much. And it also gives me a nice frame of shadow to fall off. So now I'm going straight into blackness. That's what I wanted. That's how I started this, and that's what I wanted to happen, because if this started lighting up the background, I'm mixing the zones and I lose control on what I can do back there. Now I put on the fill light over here, which is an Elgato key light, turn it on, and that has dimming controls. So I can actually control how much shadow I get, whether it's all this shadow, completely obliterate myself, or just enough to break up the shadow. And this is what it looks like with just the fill light on. And this is a $200 LED panel with a diffuser on it. And you'd think that this should look amazing, but look, it really doesn't, based on the angle of it, how close it is to me, all sorts of things. You keep in mind that you can accentuate texture really easily with the angle of light. And we can go more into that on other videos on my channel. But for the most part, this goes to show you that's all about the angle and property of the light, not just buying the most expensive light. Again, you go from just a key light, adding in a fill light, and that's the lighting for me done. Now I have to figure out the background. Well, if I turn this background on and I shut these lights off, I should become a complete silhouette. And now it's like I'm in the witness protection program, and now it looks like I'm ratting out somebody on Dateline or something, like, yeah, you should have. Like, that's what a silhouette is, right? You can't see what I look like. The only light that you're seeing on me right now is actually coming from my MacBook and my monitor. So I'm okay with that. It's definitely not making that major difference in the image. So I know that I separated my sources. I'm completely silhouetted, so I know that none of that light back there is affecting the shot forward, and none of this light that was lighting me was affecting that. That gives me two zones, and that means I can make them look however I want as long as I keep them balanced. Meaning, when I put them together, one isn't brighter than the other. They seem like they're on the same level. Nothing's too distracting, because our eyes go to the sharpest and brightest points of an image, and that should be you. Hence, I'm in focus, background soft, I'm brighter, background is just dynamically lit. In fact, that's not even two lights, that's just one light. All I did was tape two different gels together and put it on top of the light. So if you don't have money for an RGBW light, get yourself a pack of gels for like 20, 30, 40 bucks, depending on what set you get, and you can just create a different background every time. You're literally painting your background with whatever color you want, and you can change it based on whatever day it is, whatever mood you're in, whatever stream you're doing. Maybe sometimes you want to color code it to the game you're playing. Maybe sometimes you want to change the theme or topic of what you're talking about, and you can change the background. There's all these levels of control that allow you for options to create better content. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is the lens choice. We talked about a little bit the aperture, right? That the background goes out of focus, and that's cool. But there's also the length of the lens. This is a 24 to 70 millimeter lens, but right now you're looking at me at 35 millimeters on a full frame sensor. Now, if I were to zoom out like this, you can see where the light actually falls off back here, and it doesn't look as clean, right? The reason I zoomed in was to compress that background to my back. When you guys use longer lenses, we call it compression. It's really about perspective. That's a whole nother thing. All the photo nerds are gonna rip me apart in the comments, but to keep it simple, the longer the lens, the more that background comes closer to the back of your subject. Watch. So if I zoom this in, you see how all those picture frames just got a lot bigger? That's called compression. And that's with a longer lens. And also keep in mind, I am only about 3 feet away from my camera right now. So sometimes you think that a lens is too long, but that's not the case. It's really about, in fact, this is a little bit too close. I'm gonna back it up. And there you go. I have another choice, right? I could do a stream where maybe I wanted it wider and I wanted to show a circle of light that's falling off on the corners, or I could do it the way I normally do it, like this. Some people like really wide angle looks. Some people like a really tight, stretched out lens so that you have that super compression. It's up to you. The longer the lens gets though, the more out of focus that background will appear to be. If you noticed, when I zoomed out, you see how it's kind of a little sharper back there? Because to this lens, me and this background are closer in zones. Remember the zones from our lighting? Same thing with focusing and perspective. So now if I zoom this back into where I had it, now we're looking at a little bit more compression. I'll go a little bit more than that. And boom. Now I have these picture frames a little bit more of a presence. And if I wanted to, since I have face detection autofocus, I could turn away, go like this and point to something and my background comes into focus. Now you see how I have this right here? That's the reflection of my lights. And I was really worried about that when I was setting this up. And then I realized, oh, I'm just gonna block that all the time anyway. So who cares if that has a reflection in it? They'll never know, but I mean, now you do. Let's talk about focus though, because the face detect autofocus, you might not have face detection. You might not have eye detection. You might have a camera that has focus controls though, and that's super important. So let's say you don't have something that can detect your face whenever you're there, or when you hold something up, will focus on your hand like that. It's okay, because all you have to do is put something in the spot where you are going to film yourself and focus on that. Switch your camera to manual focus and lock it there, leave it there, because focus is based on distance of lens to subject. As long as the distance stays the same, everything in that distance, in a straight line obviously, will be in focus, and everything past you will be out of focus, and everything in front of you will be out of focus as well. Face detect is pretty good though, huh? It's not switching. But every time I'm talking and I like to show something, I'll go, hey, check out this crazy pumpkin. I want it to focus on the pumpkin. And then I want it to bring it back to me. So face detection is super useful. Not all face detection is created equal. Some manufacturers do it better than others. It's up to you to really do the research on that, see what your budget is, see what systems you want to get into. Maybe you already have lenses to a system that has a different camera that does offer that. That's really your call. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. I don't know if it was or not, but I get a lot of questions about why my stream looks the way it does. Just keep in mind that you want to control your exposure from both your camera and your lights. You want to make your light that's lighting you closer to you than it is to anything else in the room. And you want to have the zones. You're one zone, your background's another. If you can't create zones because the wall's right up against you, look for something as a background that's less reflective, like cloth, some duvetines, or maybe just go to a fabric shop really quick and see what cool patterns you like, but stay away from anything that has any reflections on it so that you're still the brightest part and you don't have to worry about the angle of light. And if you're somebody like me with glasses, just remember that the light that is lighting you has to be at an angle that the camera doesn't see it at. That's it. Everybody always asks, how do you shoot somebody with glasses? Just like this. I don't put the light at an angle that'll reflect back into my lens And that's it. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me. Hit me with a comment down below if you have any questions. Don't forget to join me on the Twitch channel and the Discord. That way you guys can stay in the community and ask whatever questions you might have. Share some of your work, maybe even share some of your live stream links so we can see what you're up to, see what your setups you're building out there. And remember, you don't have to go crazy with your budget. You just have to make smarter, logical decisions and then decide what you really need to purchase, if you need to purchase anything at all. Thanks so much for joining me. Don't forget to hit like, write me down with a comment down below if you have any questions. I hope this was clear. If not, let me know. I will try to answer everything I can down there, or maybe even redo this video based on your reactions to it. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell so that you're notified of when more videos come out. I go live fairly often on this channel, and I would love to have you guys in my chat room. It's always a blast when we have a full room going on in there. Thank you so much. Be good to each other out there. See you later. Peace.